Every day we give away an enormous amount of ourselves, our personal data on the internet. The question is, how much should you be concerned about your privacy, and exactly what points in that process should you be concerned about? Well, to explore that, we have Tegan Jones, the editor of the technology website Gizmodo, and we have Seamus Byrne from the Biteside Podcast Network. For you, when it comes to privacy, what's the number one thing that concerns you?
The issue of everything staying around for so long that it becomes, a problem in later life. So, I think there's that real issue of the right to be forgotten is something people have fought for, but I think there's also this aspect of, I think in a sense, the right to be forgiven. We are young and stupid, and that happens online now for so many people. And we are not the same people we were when we were teenagers as we grow older. It's one thing for someone to defend what they did at 55 when they're 65, going, I'm a totally different person now, which happens a lot in politics. But when you are 15 years old versus when you're 25 years old, there's a whole different level of humanity you might have discovered along the way. So I think that's a really important issue, and it feeds into the second factor, which is this idea of data minimization in a sense. So, this idea that why is so much being accumulated in the first place? I think there's these kind of two things that have a bit of a tension together there as well.
We are talking about a generation coming up now that have grown up with social media from pretty much day dot in terms of like their conscious life. There are different examples around the world, I think particularly in the EU, where legislation has started to come in about the right to be forgotten. How does that work in those places where they have tried to roll it out? Yeah,
it's been quite difficult actually in a lot of respects because they've had to sort of set up these systems where people can apply to have things removed, and then the process of actually sort of having these things like expunged from the Google record, is sort of quite a tricky process, particularly when it might be related to, literally it might be news information that is out there on somebody. And in some ways that could be quite different to just that basic idea of, I shared something online 15 years ago. Can I now make that go away? Quite different to going, I was the subject of a news story 15 years ago. And that there's a weird sort of problem there. And then the whole GDPR type sort of legislation in the EU has definitely...
That's the I guess maybe explain that.
Yeah, so it's basically attached to the idea that if you want to put sort of tracking into somebody's browser, you have to inform them that this is happening, and they have to have the option to accept or say no, which of course has now created this world of pop-ups all over
which everyone
the internet.
just clicks through and nothing changed.
Just get out of my way. Okay, fine.
Give me the content.
Yeah, and so in its own way, it's just that classic, decision fatigue problem where people just want it to get out of their way so they can get on with it, which is the friction problem of all of this as well, right? It's not easy. It's just in your way.
What do you think a right to be forgotten should look like, Tegan?
I think it's so tricky. Like Seamus said, it is a laborious and tricky process to get stuff expunged in the first place. I think there's going to be so many instances where it's a case-by-case basis. You've also got people who might have murdered someone when they were a teenager, and it's a matter of, should that be forgotten from the public record as well? There's just so many tricky examples. And I think it also feeds into not just a matter of should you get to be forgotten because there's stuff that's embarrassing out there or because you've done something wrong. It gets back into a really great article that I read recently about we've got kids now who have existed online without their consent from when they were born because their parents are putting up photos of them. And, this great story was about, a girl who's about 11 or 12 now, finding all of these photos on her mum's Facebook profile of stuff that's really embarrassing for her. As, all of her mum's friends and family probably thought it was cute or whatever at the time, but it's deeply embarrassing for her. It means that it can make her teenage years potentially difficult because, kids are cruel. Yeah. And it's out there for employers or everybody to see potentially for the rest of her life.
I feel like one of the kind of critical debates around all this, though, is that sometimes we probably get too focused on this sort of discussion of, photos and obvious things that we, in some way, we choose to share or not share versus the things that just get gathered up in giant, vast quantities. The uncanny ad targeting of things like Instagram and Facebook, it's because of how many location associations are built around us and both our friend networks and their locations, so that literally it'll be things like going, those two people are in the same cafe at the same time and we know that they know each other, therefore they probably met, and therefore we can now extrapolate other things to do ad targeting. You know?
And this was the thing that you wanted to talk about, which is the stuff that we don't know we're sharing.
Absolutely. So, a couple of weeks ago, Twitter came out and said that they were going to be getting rid of their part of their location sharing, where it was sharing your specific location, but they were moving it into the camera functionality. So basically what this is, it was where you can be really, really specific about where you are, which, you know what, some people might be okay with, but there has been some privacy concerns around this because originally before 2015, people might think that they were just saying, hey, tweet, and tag it as New York City, for example, but it would actually be publishing the longitude and latitude of exactly where they were. That's been fixed up. But you can still share your GPS data through similar geotagging on Twitter, but you can only really make it very vague by digging into the settings. And now that's been moved into the camera app, which in my opinion is worse potentially. Again, if people just not uneducated, but not educated in terms of geotagging, they don't realize how specific it's going to be. And now you're adding photos of them potentially with their friends, with themselves, exactly where they are, which is, bad in terms of getting targeted for ads, but also if someone might want to find them, they can now more easily do so. And that's just one example of many that are out there.
All right, there is lots more of this in the podcast of Download This Show, and it is available for you right now. Thanks, guys.